Welcome to a very special Patreon-only episode of The McFuture. This one will blow your mind, especially the conclusion. So listen all the way through. You absolutely have to. Now, also, this is probably the most conspiratorial episode you'll ever hear me do. I am not a conspiracy theorist. In fact, I had Governor Jesse Ventura on the show a while back. And he is very much a conspiracy theorist. And the thing about conspiracy theories is there's always a they, right? And the they seems to be very coordinated, very organized. I don't think that's how life works. I think what ends up happening is there are a lot of not coincidences. There are a lot of incentives that very powerful people and very powerful entities have. When they act to receive the rewards of those incentives, what ends up happening looks a lot like conspiracy. In fact, it becomes very easy retroactively to weave a conspiracy theory into it because it almost looks planned. I don't think it works like that. But there are a lot of crazy incentives out there. And especially the thing that I want to talk about today is how the elite class, people with money, with status, with power, and that includes very affluent people who vote for leaders that support these existing institutions. Hey, that got them there. You're here for a reason. If you're wealthy or you're a doctor or you're a lawyer or you're a technologist or whatever it is that you do, you are successful. And the institutions that brought you that success are not ones you want to tear down or even change in any material way. And then you have these other people that are successful by proxy, maybe the kids of successful people who in and of themselves have not achieved a lot, but they also have a resentment of their assigned success or inherited success. So they want to tear systems down. They don't have a clue. They're young typically and have not lived life and don't know what's going on. But there is a truth to the fact that these systems are not serving a lot of people well. For example, why after all these years, I'm talking decades, are people still living in ghettos? Why are there so many broken families, especially among minorities and the poor? Why are there so much drug addiction? There are a lot of incentives that motivate a lot of actions. And you would think, oh, well, this one party is keeping people down. If only it were that simple. The places where a lot of these problems perpetuate are very wealthy, like Los Angeles, for example. I think they have, I forgot the statistic, I think they have like 1/4 or 1/5 of America's homeless in just Los Angeles. That doesn't include San Francisco, which has its own encampments. So you're talking about a really rich city with some very powerful industries that has this lingering, insane problem. And you can call it failure of government, you can call it a lot of things, but the incentives aren't there, the competence isn't there to fix it, but also there is an entire system around this that perpetuates the status quo. And the status quo always serves incumbents, always serves people who are doing well. And I'm not talking about just the elites. I'm not talking about just Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and all these other people. I'm talking about just someone who lives in a nice house in a nice area is going to vote their interests. For example, they are not going to split that sweet, juicy tax money that they pay for local taxes with school districts that don't have any money. That's just not going to happen. That's never going to happen. So they are playing a game to win, even though it doesn't always look like it. And this is not a left-right thing. This is institutional power against individuals and against upstarts. And it's really important to understand that you can't have this many losers in society, because at some point the losers kick back. I don't mean loser in a derogatory term, although there are some that really are, that deserve that title. But I'm talking about people who lose in life, and you just can't have that many of them before people just rise up, or some uncomfortable things happen to the people that are the incumbents or the well-off. And the reason, and this is really important, this is one of the most important points, the veneer of caring is so powerful. That's why most institutions, most of the major institutions, from the media to Hollywood to the tech industry, all of these places are leaning on what looks like leftist caring policies. Nothing of the sort. The appearance of caring is an incredibly powerful tool. It is a veneer behind which you can hide almost anything. That's why corporations are embracing all of this stuff, because it is powerful. If you look like you care, if you look like you have a rainbow of people working for your organization, if you look like, you're helping the homeless and charity and whatever else that you're doing, you come off looking good. And it still works, and it works on a lot of people because most people don't look that deeply. And because it works, you have this appearance of leftism that's really covering up elitism, corporatism, and a lot of power that is being preserved. And it's being preserved by a bunch of tools that I'm going to get into today. This isn't a comprehensive list. It's not every single thing, but it's a lot of things. And just, to talk about the traditional left-right divide. The reason that divide doesn't really exist is the right, or as we traditionally think of like the GOP, they gave up on governance a long time ago. If you listen to their rhetoric, they don't believe in government. Now, the left acts like they believe in government, but ultimately it's self-enrichment and defending their own stuff, or the systems that got them to where they are. So you can debate who's more duplicitous, who's better, and who's worse. But the right has given up. They don't believe in any of the institutions that they criticize or that they're part of. Like, you listen to Ted Cruz, or you listen to any of these guys who are in the Republican Party, and you're like, really? You don't believe in any government, you don't believe in any public service, and meanwhile, you've been a senator for 18 years or some crazy number of years. So how are you a member of an institution you do not believe in? It is really insane. And they similarly have given up completely on education. They don't believe in college, and there's very good reasons not to, but it comes off as cynical if you're not actually actively trying to fix it. If you're just criticizing it without a fix, you're useless. You're just a blowhard. And the party as it exists today really has two things that they do. One is their real purpose, and the second is what they do in practice. So the real purpose of the Republican Party today is to reimburse their donors and to enrich themselves. So that's sort of like an A and a B. But the number one thing is they are in the rebate business. So they are, whether through contracts to the military, or it's, or whatever other constituents that give them money. And the left does the same thing. They have theirs. They have the lawyers. They have the, sort of the lefty leaning tech industry and so on. And then they cover it up with the culture war, right? So the classic is abortion, which they used to get all these conservatives on board. But now it's a little bit broader. Now it's critical race theory, and there's some legitimate criticisms. The problem is the party is not bringing any solutions to the table. Democrats are bringing plenty of solutions to the table. Most of them are terrible, but they are at least bringing ideas, some ideas from, communism or socialism, things that have failed in the past. But at least they are putting something forward, whether it works or not, whether it distorts the system or not, they're doing something. The right, they have one thing. They have a meme war that they're fighting against the crazy left and all the crazy stuff that the left does. And the left does a lot of crazy stuff, announcing new genders every day and all this stuff. It's really nuts. But they don't have a vision, they don't have any policies, and they've given up on every single institution that they've criticized, from Hollywood to media to tech. And yeah, there's a few sprinkling of media people and whatever, but they're all pretty much silent except for Fox News. And Fox News has no influence, realistically, except for old people. They don't have any influence over the youth, over minorities, over anyone who actually, the affluent. So they're kind of worthless. They're good for entertainment. And actually, I think the only people left watching Fox News besides, old people are other media people from the left, just so they have content, because they all want to put out Tucker Carlson clips and tell you how awful he is. Anyway, but that's the reality. And at the heart of both parties is a certain kind of corporatism and a beating heart of power and influence and status. And these are things to be defended. And every single institution, especially media, are designed to defend it. And the reason media is so important as a control tactic is because it's out there. It's public. Everyone receives it. Everyone consumes it. Not only are they the messengers and the water boys for the elite, but they use other leftist institutions as enforcers or backup. So they use academia and academic studies to back up their ideas and policies, no matter how specious. I wrote once that studies are like Bible passages. You can find one to support any conclusion you want. And that's what it is right now, because most of these studies, even the ones that sort of look scientific, they're not. They're social studies, or at best, they're correlation studies that show that, people who do this end up with this, whether it's cancer or whether it's a psychological problem or whatever it is. And a lot of it is a proxy for wealth, because people with money have better resources and ways to take care of themselves, whether it's healthcare or mental health or exercise or whatever else. So if you look at it through that lens, most of these studies are total and utter bullshit. Anyway, but they are used to a very, very effective and powerful degree by media to back up or create legitimacy for a lot of these issues that the left is putting forward. And the same thing goes for think tanks, but they're much less useful. They have shittier brands, bottom line. The right tends to use think tanks more because that's all they have. They've lost academia, not that they ever had it, but they have no influence there. So let's get into it. Let's talk about these 15 control tactics, and I'm going to count them down. Number 15, buy and expose. So I actually did a piece on one of my previous podcasts, so I'm not going to repeat it, but it was called Everyone Has a Price. And what's funny is I used Patrisse Cullors, the head of the BLM movement, or the co-founder, as my example. And she's someone I tried to get on the show. But as it turns out, she's been really busy with real estate. So the $90 million that they raised in 2020 has been disappearing. It hasn't been appearing in the communities. No one's being helped. No one's getting the money who actually could use the money, except this one woman who bought 4 houses and spent millions of dollars. To go back to the core principle here, everyone has a price. And the poorer you are, the cheaper it is to buy you off. And once you're bought off, you're compromised. Or at best, you're controlled. That means that you're pacified, your corners have been sanded off, and now you can be told what to do, and you're not going to be as radical because now you're on the dole. You depend on the establishment for your money. Same thing happened with Reverend Al Sharpton. He was doing all kinds of basically, what would you call it? It's extortion of corporations. He basically threatened, hey, I'm going to take my followers, the 5 people that are left who show up to his protests, and I will brand you a racist corporation if you don't give me concessions. And the concessions are money, board seats, and other giveaways. So that was his racket. Jesse Jackson was in this racket. Now what's her name is in this racket, although she's not as good at it. Robin DiAngelo. So there's a bunch of these people. They're basically hustlers. And this woman, I don't know what her intentions were originally with BLM, but it was very, very easy to sideline her because you paid her off, and now she could have been controlled, but worse than that, she was exposed. And once you're exposed, you step down and you're done. You're marginalized, you're over. So that's how elites preserve power. Because a person who created an organization that could certainly upend status quo was gone. And guess who else is gone? Colin Kaepernick, gone. Because he's relying on Nike contracts. He's relying on a bunch of other things that he's making money from. He's not going to be doing the things that he was doing before. Now he's performing. And the same thing happens to a lot of radicals who just get bought. It is a tactic, and it always works. Number 14, protect the sacred cows. And a lot of this is enforced through media. So perfect example, Biden. You would think, and this is kind of funny, Kyle Dunnigan, who's a comedian who does a lot of these face swap videos, and he does killer impressions of Biden, and he does a great one of Bill Maher. Anyway, he does a sketch show with these face swaps called The Fresh Prez of DC, based on Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. And he makes fun of Bill Maher in that because Bill Maher can't find one funny thing about Joe Biden. Not one. Millions of funny things. Even now, with Trump gone, tons of funny things about Trump. Not one about Joe Biden. Not when he's falling up the stairs. Not when he's saying crazy things. Nothing. Not one funny thing. And so Kyle makes fun of it. And it's so true because they protect their own. Same thing with Cuomo until they couldn't anymore. He was just touching too many ladies. And so kissing, touching, I don't know what he's up to. But that's another guy they protected. Even Patrisse Cullors, who, I think it was the New York Post published that she bought these 4 houses and put photos of there. They didn't put the addresses, but the social networks and these other media companies banned those stories. You couldn't even put them out because they said it doxed her or released her information to the public, which it didn't. It didn't release her addresses or anything. They will protect their sacred cows until they can protect them no longer. So that's why you kind of need right-wing media to balance the left wing. And then when the right wing is in power, you need the left wing. But it's not even, hold everyone to the same standard. If you're going to scrutinize the hell out of Trump, you got to do the same thing with Biden. Number 13, weaving narratives. And these narratives are so powerful. And the stories that get reported and the stories that do not get reported, just as important, are all part of narratives. So for example, the most recent, of course, is the fear narrative for COVID and the different Delta strains and all the, the Lambda and, I don't know, all the other Greek alphabet words they've got. But someone posted today a quote from an expert on CNN, and CNN is core to this fear mongering, as is MSNBC. The right does their own. Okay, I got to stop saying this left-right thing. Just assume that both are enforcing some sort of elitism. I don't want to just keep playing that game left-right. But the guy quote, I'm going to try to remember the quote. He said something like that: "Your child is just waiting for another child to kill them." It was an insane quote. It was so insane, it just blew my mind. Throughout COVID in the United States, through mid-August of 2021, early August 2021, 424 children died of COVID. That is tragic, absolutely tragic. However, these kids, a lot of them had comorbidities. And if you look at it statistically, it is a rounding error compared to the number of kids that are out there and the number of exposures or potential situations where you can be exposed. It is a statistical anomaly. It doesn't even rank anywhere on the list of the biggest risks to kids, like driving. I think it was over 4,000 kids die every year, or 3,000 or 4,000 die in car accidents, suicide, and a whole bunch of other things. You don't get to the hundreds until like number 10 or 11 or 12. So we're talking about an insane narrative. And this is being promoted. Why? Because teachers don't want to come into work and they want concessions and they want, I don't know what the unions want, but they also want kids wearing masks. And more important, they want to pass policies because fear passes emergency legislation. So the longer the emergency lasts, the more legislation you can pass. And they don't even hide it. Rahm Emanuel, who was President Obama's chief of staff and then became mayor of Chicago, he famously said, "Never let a serious crisis go to waste." And they are not letting this one go to waste at all. Another narrative is race, because if you believe this is a racist society, you can achieve the goals of racial equity or justice or whatever else that you want. Now, race is also a very convenient distraction from class, and it's very effective because if you get people fighting over race, they're not looking at your bank accounts, they're just looking at your color. And they're not looking at other people who are suffering, or because they're inconvenient, right? Because there's white people who don't have their shit together either, and also there are white people getting killed by cops, all this stuff. But if you divide people, you conquer them because they're so busy fighting with each other over color, they're not looking at the money or the people with money who are helping weave these narratives that divide us. Same thing with wage gap. The wage gap, and this is NPR has done this, so it's not even like some wild theory. The real wage gap, if you control for similar job level and job function and industry, is somewhere between 2 and 7%. Still an issue to be addressed, and there's some theories about why. One big one is, and this is, I think, a Swedish study that said that women don't negotiate raises as aggressively, and they don't switch jobs as often. So, there are logical explanations, and there are ways to address it. But consistently, from Obama to Biden to all of the activists and the media, they continue to say, oh, the wage gap is like 30% or women get paid 70 cents on dollar. I mean, it's observably untrue because if I had a company and I could fire all the men and save 30%, I would do it tomorrow. And in fact, women are even better workers in a lot of cases. So you're going to be ahead in terms of performance and in terms of profits. Sign me up. So this is just provably untrue. And you look up the Planet Money, is either Planet Money or the Indicator podcast from NPR, and they tell you about the real wage gap, and they have the stats and everything to prove it. So you don't have to trust me about it. But it's really not that big, but it is a tool that is being used to achieve an agenda. And this is how elites get their way. And we're fighting over gender now. So we're fighting over race on this front, over gender on the other front. So keep us divided. Keep us divided. Division is distraction. And if we're distracted, we're not asking for things. Number 12, boogeymen. persons. You got to be politically correct now. So QAnon, yeah, there are some kooks who believe in, God knows what that theory is, that there's child molesters and Trump was sent by God to fight off the Trump molesters. I was a Trump molester. Child molesters. Yeah, that is insanity. There's a few people online who are signed up to this nonsense, just like the flat earthers, just like, the 9/11 people, just like the deep state people. There's a lot of people signed up for all kinds of theories. A lot for a room, not a lot for a country. These are fringes. These are tiny specks. Same thing with white supremacists. These are people without any cultural, institutional power, financial power. They've got nothing. They are masturbating 86% of their waking hours. Whenever they're not using those sticky fingers to Google something insane or to go on Reddit, they are masturbating. These people are losers, but they are very easy to make into boogeymen. The right does the same. Oh, this right and left thing, I'm getting exhausted. But same thing. You have these crazy people making up genders or making proclamations or doing all kinds of crazy things, saying crazy things. Oh, I'm not having kids because I'm trying to be green. Like all kinds of nuttiness, just nuttiness. And it's very easy to take it and blow it up while doing nothing because it looks like work, right? Like, look at the right. They're so busy fighting the culture war and they're winning. Look at the left. They're going after QAnon. They've created an internal commission inside of the FBI or NSA to go after white supremacists, like two idiots in a room that just finished masturbating. Hopefully the FBI doesn't break in when their fingers are all involved. But again, very powerful because they are distractions. Number 11, smear campaigns, or more commonly called cancel culture these days. It is very easy to smear someone whom you fear. And the only people worth smearing are ones that you fear. Fearing and smearing go together like cookies and cream. It is the s'mores of media. Joe Rogan gets it all the time. Why does Joe Rogan get it all the time? Because he's positioned as a right winger. He endorsed Bernie Sanders, and they're like, he's a right winger. Clearly, these are insane narratives, but the reason they're trying to cancel him is because he's a threat. He does not play the game. He does not rely on access like all of these networks do, because these networks have no audience. So they need, Elizabeth Warren or whatever senator to come along. So they they really have to play the game, and they can't be too rough on these people because they rely on those people showing up to their shows. They rely on those people to approve their hosting of debates. This is how they make money. This is their whole business model. So they can't afford to lose these people. So they have to play along. Joe Rogan does not have to play along, and he has a huge loyal audience, something they don't have, and it has been waning. They're almost dead, these companies. DeSantis is another guy. He's a threat. He's a threat because he's kind of, attracting the Trumpers, and he knows what to say about COVID to his constituents because he's, very forceful against all the restrictions. They did a smear on him that a lot of people still think is true. They claimed, I thought it was true because I fell for it, that he was faking COVID numbers. And that was proven to be a complete lie. In fact, the one who was faking COVID numbers is Cuomo, who is being protected by the media. So it is insanity. So anyone who's a threat will be smeared. So this is why I encourage people not to jump to conclusions. Experience the person firsthand, especially if they have any kind of public footprint. Try to understand what they're all about, what motivates them, and you will find most of them are not the monsters that they're being painted as, because the monstrosity serves a purpose, and that purpose is always power and defending the elites. Number 10. Algorithmically squelching people. This is silent but deadly, like the greatest fart on earth. They are able to, without telling you how the algorithms work or how it happens, everyone from YouTube to Twitter to Facebook, all of these companies, they decide what gets seen and what gets buried. And sometimes they do it so subtly, you barely even notice. So I heard Jimmy Dore, who's a very left guy, he's a big Bernie guy, talking about this on a podcast. And he talks about how, he's got, I think, close to 1 million subscribers, but they don't let him get above 1 million. They really throttled his growth. And his YouTube videos aren't getting the views that they used to get. Same thing with Kyle Kulinski, who's also a lefty who's very critical of the left. They're not getting the views that they used to get and that their subscriber numbers would lead you to believe that they would get. So they're basically being squelched and contained. And same thing with searches. I've noticed this. So I was looking to make fun of myself, like for one of these covers for my videos, and I was looking for a fat photo to put my face on. When I Googled it, Google showed me all like fat acceptance results, how good it is to be obese and how, there's discrimination and we must understand. Not one photo of a fat guy that I actually needed. So, they are sculpting our reality, and these algorithms are the means by which they do it. And it's extremely powerful and it's extremely subversive because you can't really see it. It's unless you're tracking the stats, you will never know. Number 9, when algorithmic suppression does not work anymore, you ban the crap out of people. So a lot of right-wingers and some left-wing publications all got banned. Trump, of course, famously, but there's a whole bunch of other people, Alex Jones, even individual stories. The Hunter Biden story, which now is true, it's 100% true, but was banned. Not only was it banned from public posting, if you tried to send that link in a Facebook message, it got deleted. Facebook algorithms deleted that message. So people and entire ideas. Same thing with the Wuhan theory for COVID. Now it's commonly accepted, and it took Jon Stewart to make it so. But now it's okay to talk about because the lab leak is the only logical thing, because this is a thing that it corresponds to the DNA of the virus. When you look at it, it's man-made and manipulated, or at least that's what a lot of biologists are saying. Anyway, point is that when you can't do these things subversively, you do it overtly. You just cut people off from public networks, and PayPal and MasterCard have cut people off from getting having accounts or getting their payments processed. Patreon has kicked people off. So this is a very common thing, and it's going to happen more often. And I think it won't change until enough people on all sides are also banned and people start really making more noise. We're not at that point yet. Number 8, co-opting outsiders, turning them into insiders. You have never in your life heard a more neutered individual than Bernie Sanders today. The man who is calling for revolution. He used that every other sentence, maybe, for his entire campaign in 2016 and 2020. The guy is now Joe Biden's biggest fan. These two bros are hugging it out, trying not to break each other's bones. They're very brittle. And I saw him interviewed on, because they put him on a committee. They put him in charge of finances. This is the funniest thing ever. The guy who doesn't believe in budgets, who wants to spend on everything. He wants free healthcare, free education, free, everything free energy, free housing, free whatever. You name it, Bernie's going to give it away for you. The guy who wants to give everything for free is in charge of budgeting under Biden. That is incredible. That is, talk about the fox guarding the hen house. It is really crazy. So Bernie was interviewed on a show called Talking Points with Sagar and Crystal. Really interesting. You should watch it or watch their clip discussing the interview. He has been so neutered. You have not seen a man this neutered before. He could not say anything that he wanted to say because now he's an insider. He has to play the game, and if he doesn't, he's out. And this is the first time anyone's ever listened to him. He was always the crazy guy with the crazy hair banging on podiums, and finally they put him in some position of power, but that position comes with strings. That means you can't say certain things if you want to retain that power. Same thing has happened with AOC. She's getting attacked from the left, from people like Jimmy Dore and Kyle Kulinski, because she's not standing up for any of the things she said she supported, like Medicare for all. She's not fighting for that. She's not fighting to put all these provisions in because she knows Nancy Pelosi is in charge and she will smack her down when she gets out of line. So now to keep that sweet gig and that $1 million budget that every congressperson gets, she has to play the game and toe the line. And that's what she's going to do. You make the outsider the insider, and you have pacified them. Number 7, finance opponents. There's private and public versions of this. So the public version is when the Democratic Party saw that Tulsi Gabbard wasn't playing their game. She quit the DNC when she found out that they were screwing Bernie Sanders. She took a principled stance. Then they sent the dogs after her. They sent Hillary Clinton to smear her, and they started funding her opponent. So the reason she didn't run was because she had no chance of winning. Her opponent was being just drowning in cash from the DNC and Democratic donors because they want people who play along. They don't want people who speak their mind, who are independent minded. So, and she's a very powerful force. She served in the military. She speaks the truth. She's a very smart woman. So she is a threat. So you finance the opponents. Now there's a private sector version of this. So Peter Thiel famously funded several lawsuits, but one by Hulk Hogan against Gawker put Gawker out of business. So Gawker was this online gossip rag, basically, and they published videos of Hulk basically having affairs. And so that whole lawsuit was financed by Peter Thiel, not because he's in love with Hulk Hogan or a huge wrestling fan, but because he wanted to take down Gawker. So what do? You finance their opponent. And this happens more frequently than we think. Number 6, infiltrate or coerce. So this was hilarious. Hilarious in a crazy, bizarre way. But you have to see the story, if you haven't followed it, of Governor Whitmer. There was a plot to kidnap her. Now, the funny thing is that there were 16 people involved. 10 of them were spies. They were plants. They were put in there by the government. And those 10 convinced the other 6 retards to actually to go along with this plot. They didn't come up with the plot. The government came up with the plot and convinced these 6 imbeciles that this is a good idea. So now they're up on, conspiracy charges and all kinds of things, but they were made to do it by the government. They were entrapped because they're idiots. So, now this is a very common tactic. So there's a concept called agent provocateur. This is incredibly common and used by governments to squelch protests. So what they'll do is they send plainclothes agents into crowds, so protests, whatever, and have them get violent or destructive, start throwing bricks or setting things on fire. And once that happens, it creates an excuse to send the military or the cops or whoever to stop the protest and break it up. This is very commonly used. Look it up. There are countless examples of agent provocateurs. It may have happened during the summer riots for BLM or the affiliated ones, and same thing with January 6th. no one would know for sure. That's the crazy thing about this, because everyone ends up getting arrested, or, and the ones who are agent provocateurs clearly get let off, but the other people are now in trouble. So this is a very powerful tool, and you can also infiltrate these groups and get them that way. But when you infiltrate and also do all the brainstorming to come up with the ideas, who's the terrorist? Number 5, laundering. Laundering is huge. Whenever you're doing something shitty, well, you got to dress it up like you're doing something good. So that's what woke corporations are. That's what the tokenism that they do is. That's all it is. They're not substantively changing. They're hiring the right trainers. They're saying the right words. They're putting the right ads out. They're funding the right organizations. But they're not fundamentally changing the core of their organization, or if they're polluting rivers or selling sugar to kids and poisoning them, and their teeth are rotting out, and they're obese, and they're dying of COVID because they're obese. Like this, like no one's changing the core, or the shitty illegal stuff that pharmaceutical companies have been doing and getting people addicted to opioids, all that stuff. Like they're not changing that. They're just going out there and they're like, oh, have you seen this rainbow of people we've got? It is the ultimate in laundering. So you take your dirty money and you clean it up, and you clean it up with all kinds of tools that the woke people gave them. They created these tools. It's so funny, and it could all be backed up by science, because you can just pick a study out of academia. You could probably just blindfold yourself and just pick a study, and that study will say exactly what you wanted to say, and then you can fund the organizations that believe in it. Okay, number 4, pacification or crumbs. This is very common. Notice that Trump, for the first time for a Republican, was like, yeah, give people money. $2,000 check, $4,000 check. He was bidding against himself at some point. He's like, no, not $1,500, $3,000, because he doesn't care. He just wants to look good. He wants you to like him. That's all he wants. The man just wants to be loved. He wants to be hugged. He wants you to care about him. He wants to sign those checks and give you the money. And then Nancy Pelosi's like, oh, no, we're not sending checks with Trump's signature to people, because that'll make him win the election. It is such a crazy game that's being played, but the game is you pacify people. You make a bunch of promises, you give them stuff, and the Republicans are just as bad as the Democrats. They're promising whatever makes sense to them, but that's the thing. You make promises and you give people crumbs, because the real money went to giant corporations. The airlines got bailed out almost entirely. So they're the ones benefiting. Giant chains, CVS was allowed to stay open. All those small shops were supposed to be closed. That's what's going on. We get the crumbs, and the giant enterprises get rescued and bailed out and consolidate, because they get more power when the little guys go out of business, because they run out of crumbs. Number 3, flat out propaganda. Now, the difference between propaganda and what I've talked about earlier is it has overt government involvement. And we now have overt government involvement. Jen Psaki, who's the press secretary for Biden, she was talking about social networks and how they're in touch with people who are spreading misinformation. Who defines misinformation? Who cares? They're going to define it. And so they are not just banning them from one network, they're making sure, the government is making sure they're banned from all networks, because you wouldn't want misinformation spread. They're also working with Hollywood to weave masking and vaccination content and stories into media productions and creative outputs. So they've met with Hollywood and they're encouraging it. There was a whole song and dance number. Who's that guy, the British guy who invaded us with his horrible no talent, who does a late night show? He does a sing-along show with karaoke. Anyway, that guy did an entire song and dance number about vaccinations. It was so nauseating, like, and so over the top. I mean, just be honest with people. If you're honest with people, eventually even the resistors will come along for the ride. They just don't trust you. And when you have this buffoon dancing around singing about vaccinations, people believe you even less because it looks fraudulent. It looks like a lie. Anyway, so propaganda, overt propaganda, government to entity. And then number two, implicit threats. When they're not specifically telling you who to ban or how to weave in vaccination stories, they are implicitly threatening. Like whenever they call in tech execs, that's them putting those executives on notice saying, hey, if you don't follow along, if you don't squelch misinformation, if you don't do certain things, we're going to come after you. We're going to break you up. We're going to treat you like monopolies. So there are tons of threats, and the language is super threatening from both left and right. Oh, left and right. Anyway, the language that they use, because a lot of these guys, the senators and Congress people, they're all grandstanding anyway. So they make these long speeches, and then the CEO will give like a yes or no answer. So you'll have like 48 minutes that Rand Paul speaks, and then a one-word answer. No, that's not the case. And same thing with all the antitrust. Antitrust is a tool of control. Whether you break a company up or talk about breaking a company up, the result is kind of the same. It's sort of like cancellations. If you fear being canceled, if you fear losing your job, you stay in line. You stay under control. And same thing here. So corporations will respond to incentives, and their incentive is to keep government at bay. And of course, number one, when all else has failed, when everything has not worked out, where your propaganda just didn't work, when you couldn't cancel the right people, you couldn't throw them off social media and hurt them, you kill them. You kill them. That is what happened with Epstein, allegedly. Sometimes a person's got to go. They got too much information. They're too powerful. And this happens probably more often than we think. We don't know exactly. It certainly happens in other countries. There's no reporter in Russia right now that is not drinking plutonium. It doesn't happen. And there's no reporter in China. There's no reporter in China. There's no media in China. There's nothing of substance. China makes sure that you don't even try. Russia, they still kind of try because they're insane. Because that's the Russian attitude. Like just when you grow up with like snowfall that's above your head standing up, you do crazy things. So that's what they do, the Russians. Anyway. This is what goes on. These are just some of the tactics, and they are not coordinated necessarily. They are products of incentives that ultimately, in aggregate, serve to preserve status quo and by proxy, keep the elites in power. And those that are doing what they're doing, whether it's in a corporation or in an academic institution or government, keep them in place. So here's the crazy conclusion. With all of the BLM protests and all of the cultural upheaval and all of the talk of critical race theory and just talk of race in general, a very ironic thing happened. America put Black people in charge. And it's not necessarily a bad thing if you think that you're threatened by it. It's not necessarily a good thing because there are people among Black people, just like there are people among white people that have bad ideas. But Black people are in charge. They have subtly already been in charge for a couple of reasons. The Black culture is the dominant culture. If you go to the white suburbs, what are white kids doing? They're rapping. They're listening to Kanye. They're listening to Drake. When you go to Baltimore, into the inner city, are they singing Robert Goulet? It's the first name that came to mind. I was like, who's the whitest guy on earth? Are they singing Harry Connick Jr.? Are they singing, like all these like Pop-Tarts songs? I don't know what the latest ones are. Billie Eilish? No, they're not. The dominant culture musically, in terms of cinema, in terms of just cool, in terms of fashion, is the Black culture. It already won on the cultural side. And now it's going into the political realm, the business realm, and everywhere else. It reminds me of what Chris Rock said about baseball. He did like a short video on baseball. And his point was, when you lose the Black customer, you lose the sport. And you look at baseball, the average age of the fan has been going up. I think it's somewhere crazy, like 56 years old. I don't have it in front of me, but look it up. It's a crazy number. And the audiences have been dwindling. And there's problems with the game, but also there aren't Black kids who are being recruited to play the sport. It's either too expensive, or there's more competition in basketball, or more opportunity in basketball or football. So they go there. There's a lot of truth to this, because the Black culture drives American culture. And there are very good Black leaders out there that are starting to surface, and some of whom I've talked to on this podcast. Glenn Lowry, John McWhorter. There's people like Chloe Valdery, Thomas Chatterton Williams, Kamel. Kamel only goes by his first name on on Twitter, so I always forget his last name. But there are so many smart, thoughtful Black leaders that are surfacing. And quite frankly, they are now charged with saving the country. I'm going to elaborate on this theory a little bit further in the future, but suffice it to say that the words I say, the words, some white girl who can be called Karen says, the words that, old people say, or anyone who's rich, they're being discounted. It's not fair, because the ideas could be perfectly relevant. But because of the rules that have been created, the Black community and the Black culture is in charge. And the good thing is, and there's a lot of good things, but the good thing is most Black people are no different than white people. They want the same things for their kids. They want safety. They want good communities. They want good education. They want all these things. And the activists don't speak for them, but they speak over them, and they speak loudly, and they speak frequently. So now it's just a matter of those other voices coming up and pushing back, and honestly, redefining Americanism and changing some of the institutions that are enforcing status quo, elitism, and all this other stuff. The world's perception becomes the perception. Black is cool, Black is powerful, and Black is in charge. That is the reality. I hope people take this the right way, because I actually think it's something profound to think about. I guess you let me know. That's it for this episode. I'm Steve Factor. See you next time on The McFuture.